In this video, we're going to be taking a look at the tables and story templates within Fantasy Grounds. So we're going to be using Fantasy Grounds Classic and the 5th edition rule set, although the functionality that we're going to go over should be common to all rule sets that are based off of the core RPG rule set. All right, so in this case, we're going to talk about the rollable tables, which are the data type here located on the banners. This is not the layout tables that are available as a formatting type in paragraphs, which you can learn about in our previous video on formatted text. So let's take a look at tables, their basic construction. So I'll open up the table window here and create a new blank table. So when we create a new blank table, there are several different fields that we have. We have, of course, our name of the table. We have a description if we want to have any kind of a descriptive element of what the table is there for, what it's rolling. We have the roll button, which allows us to actually do a roll or perform a roll here on this table. And this section right here is where we can define the dice roll that will be used. If we do not define a dice roll, Fantasy Grounds will automatically calculate the necessary dice roll based on the numbers that are used in the table. So we can override that default behavior by putting in our own custom dice roll here. Next up, we have the modifier. If there's a modifier, for example, if you had 12 entries on your table, and rather than rolling just from 1 to 12, you wanted to roll a D10 plus 2 or a 2D6 or something like that, you could set that up here. We have our output types. Tables can be output to 4 different data types. One, the default is to output the values to chat, so anything you roll will get output here into the chat window. We can choose a story, we can choose a parcel, and an encounter record. So those are the 4 different types, and we're going to go through each of those to understand them. Down here we have our actual rollable portion. On the left-hand side we have the number ranges, so of what the dice will roll. So let's say we're going to roll a 6-sided dice. We can start with 1, 2, 3, and then the second entry will be from 4 to 6, and we can manually type those in. And then this right-hand side, we can have a label. You can see here that it's automatically recalculated. We can set the label here. Let's say we're outputting a result. Something as simple there. Perhaps there's a descriptive element or something else that makes sense for what it goes in this particular column. And then the values that we're going to be outputting if we roll this particular value. Let's say on a 1 to 3, nothing happens. And then on a 4 to 6, something happens. So that's your basic something happens and nothing happens. Now when we roll this, we can roll it and output it. It'll roll a value for me and output that value to the chat because I've selected chat as my output. If I have the numbers set so that there's not a standard dice type, so for example in this case there is no D5, I can still go ahead and roll it. It just won't do the dice animation, so it'll just automatically output generate the random number and output the value based on whatever I roll. So something happens, nothing happens. You can see here it toggling back and forth as it rolls through. There's also a notes tab here on the right hand side, which you can include any additional notes required for this table that gives explanation or anything. The tables here default when you create a new table. It defaults to just having these 2 entries, but of course we're not limited to that. We can edit the list of results and we can add additional ones. We can add additional rows here, and again we'll have to redo the numbers. We can also add additional columns using these 2 buttons here. So this yellow arrow pointing down will allow us to create a second column, or a third or a fourth, however many columns we would like to have. And the one with the red X will, of course, delete the rightmost column. So you can have simple tables with just a single column with one or more rows, or you can have complex tables with multiple columns and multiple rows with values in each one. All right, so when we are rolling on our table, let's open up our tables here. Let's show some examples here. When we're rolling on our table, we can put in information like I just showed here, just basic text. And this can be as short as a few words, or it can be a whole sentence or a big descriptive paragraph, whatever you would like to go in here. But we also have the option of using a few modifiers. So the modifier syntax that we're going to look at is to use this square brackets around some information, and that will let us have a few more options available to us. So let's create a new table here, a simple one-to-one, and I'm actually going to just delete that so we have just a single row, and we'll see the results here. So the square bracket syntax allows us to do a couple of different things. First thing it allows us to do is it allows us to roll a number. So if I do 2d6 and I just output that to chat and I roll it, you can see it's output a value, 6. I can roll it again and it'll produce a 5, 10, 9, and so forth. I can create a number here within this rollable table here. The second thing that I can do is use the letter X. So let's say I use 2x. This syntax allows me to do multiple times of something. So in this case, it didn't do anything because I'm not actually asking it to roll on anything on a subtable, which we'll get to in just a second, but I'll come back to that. One of the other syntaxes that it can do, or one of the other features that it can do, is that it can be set up to roll on a subtable, which means that this table will then call another table, roll on the subtable, and then come back and provide the results back. I actually have a graphic here to demonstrate this. So if this is our top level table that will produce the final output, we can choose to roll on one subtable. We can choose to roll on multiple subtables. Those subtables can roll on one or more, and it can go as deep as you want to go. And then all of that information will be passed up and included in this final output. So to roll on a subtable, there's two different ways of designating that. The first is just to use the square brackets and then type in the name of the subtable. So in this case, I have an attitude subtable, which just has a variety of happy, sad, angry, and bored. So if I can just type in attitude, and then when I roll on this subtable, you'll notice it rolls and then produces the result here, angry. So what it's doing is it's coming into this higher level table, finding the subtable in the square brackets, rolling on the subtable, passing that information back, and then putting that into the output. We can do this very easily. Now, the other elements that I demonstrated with the X, so I can add 2 times on the attitude table. Now when I roll that, it's going to produce 2 outputs, so happy and angry. If I roll again, it'll produce bored and happy. So I can roll multiple times, or I can roll a dice value. So I can say 2d3, not 22, 2d3 times on the attitude table. So in that case, it will be a whole bunch of things. Anywhere from 2 to 6 times it'll produce an output for me. So those are a couple of different ways that you can modify the results. Now, rolling on a subtable, it's important to note that the name of your subtable has to be, of course, spelled correctly here in the results. But it's also important that you not have multiple tables with the same name. So, for example, if I created another table with the name attitude, and I gave it some values, this Fantasy Grounds is not going to have a way of determining which one. So it'll likely just take the first one that it encounters, which may not be the one that you want it to roll. So in these kind of situations, there is another way of determining which subtable you want to roll on. So let's say I want to roll here on the gender subtable, but I actually have multiple subtables with the same name because of various modules that come in that may have the same named tables. So I can just, instead of typing it in square brackets, I can roll on a subtable by dragging that table name directly here and in creating a link to it. Now when I roll, it'll note that this is a table, this is a link to a table, and then it will roll on that subtable. Now we can use that same syntax with the square brackets to control the number of times that we roll on that subtable. So let's put in something like 1d3 times here in the label, and then when we roll it, it will roll multiple times. You can see here it's rolled 2 times on the gender table and produced female and female. I can do it again and just say male, male, rolled twice again. And so you can use that syntax to increase the numbers or introduce variability in the results. All right, now another important thing to point out here. We talked about the different types of tables that you can output to, or the different types of results that you can output to. And so the default is chat, which just outputs the information to the chat. And we have story, parcel, and encounter. Now it's important to note that the top level table that is rolled, this is the initial table that you're going to click the roll on, that is the table that will determine what all of the final output will be, what format it will be. So if your top level table is set to output to an encounter, then it doesn't matter what all of the subtables are set to. The data will get rolled up and produced as an encounter record. It will, if your subtables are producing items, those will just get quietly dropped because they don't have any representation in an encounter record. So it's important when you are designing your tables, if you're rolling on subtables and whatnot, to make sure that the outputs or the linkages that are within those are going to be to the appropriate types. You don't want an encounter table calling a treasure table or a parcel. You don't want a parcel that calls up monster entries, for example, or NPC entries, just because it'll quietly drop them and they won't be usable. You'll produce empty results. All right, so the capabilities of rolling on subtables is actually quite powerful. So we can set up very complex, interrelated tables to produce, whatever kind of unique output we want. So I have an example here that we're going to generate for this video, using that same graphic, but I've labeled everything. So these are going to be our layers of tables here. So first off, we have our high level table, which is going to be our generate random treasure table. Then there's going to be 2 options. On the first option, we're going to roll 1d2 times on treasure table A. And the second available option is to roll 1d3 times on treasure table B. So let's go ahead and do that level first. So we have our generate random treasure. As you can see, it's empty right now. So let's take treasure table A and just drag and drop it, and treasure table B and drag and drop it. Let's give it some numbers. Unlock it first. So now we've got treasure table A and B linked here, and we want the 1d2 times. Now it's important here that you use the X when you're rolling on subtables, otherwise it won't work. Spell here 1d3 times on treasure table B. So now we've generated this this thing. Whenever we roll on it, it will go ahead and roll that many times on those subtables. And double check, make sure our output is set to parcel. But we're not done with our organization. we need to finish up these various tables. So treasure table A, we can see here, also links to two entries, once on the magic items table and once on, or one option is to roll on the armor table. So let's open up treasure table A, and same kind of thing. Let's remove this secondary column because we don't need it. Let's say we're going to roll once on the magic items table and once on the armor table. So let's find our magic items table, same thing, and our armor table. All right, so now we've got once on the magic items table and once on the armor table. But what is in the magic items table? So in this case right now, our magic items table is empty. So let's go ahead and throw a few options in there. Now I've got the SRD loaded. I'll grab a couple of, we'll grab an arrow of +1, and we'll say a battle axe +1. So those are the two magic items that I'm going to have the option of choosing. Now notice I don't care what the output is because the final output is going to be determined by the higher level table. So that's our magic items table now defined. Let's give it some numbers again because it doesn't fill in the numbers automatically for you on a default created table. So now we've got our magic items table. Let's do our armor table. Same thing. We can drop some leather armor and say some padded armor. Give it some numbers. So our armor table is now complete. Our magic items table is complete. So that finishes up this left-hand side of our graphic. So now let's take a look at the right-hand side, treasure table B. So for treasure table B, we have two options again. And in this case, we are going to roll once on the armor table. So we're going to link it to here again. And then we're going to roll once on the weapon table. Now we've already created the armor table. That's already been produced. So we don't need to redo that one. But the weapon table is now empty. So let's add a weapon here. And let's add some weapons. So we will add a club and let's say a dagger. So now we've got all of these different sub tables defined. We've got our treasure table B, we've got the armor, the weapons, and all of those various types of things defined. And the weapons table has another sub item, magic items. Let's add one more entry, and we're going to include a single roll on the magic items table as well as an option. So on a 3, instead of giving a club or a dagger, it will give one of these magic items. So now we've constructed each layer of our rollable random treasure generator. So when we get our highest level table, we can go ahead and roll and watch it construct the output as a treasure parcel. So you can see here it's doing all of the different rolling. We're rolling a bunch of padded armor. Okay, well, we can try that again, see if we produce a different result. We ended up with a magical +1 arrow, and one more time. All right, just a single bit of padded armor. So you can see here we can generate these as complex or as simple as we would like. You can have many different layers of subtables that are generating entries in order to make them complicated or unique to your particular story or world setting. The other type of record that we output frequently is an encounter record. Now, I don't have a image particular to it that we're going to be generating, but we will go ahead and create a random encounter. So let's pop up this table here, a random encounter table. Now I have 4 different options here, either nothing happens, an easy encounter, a medium encounter, and a hard encounter. Now I'm going to clear these just so that you see what I'm doing. And on each of these, I want to roll on a subtable. Now, I could create a table for an easy encounter and include as detailed rollers as I want. But in this case, I'm going to have all of these just roll on a single table, this monsters table. And then I'll change the number of times that it rolls. So for example, I'm going to just link each of these to the same table. But I'm going to change the text and say this is going to be 2 times. This one is going to be 4 times. And this last one will be 6 times. Now the monsters table that I'm linking to is just a listing of the monsters grabbed from the NPC. We can go ahead and add another one if we like. Create a new entry, grab an NPC. We'll call this we'll give this one a mummy. And we'll have a single mummy as an option there. Give it a number. All right, so this is our monster table. Now you'll notice some of these are marked as singular. Some of them I also include the dice roll and the number of times. This will just increase the grouping size of the outputted result. So when I go ahead and roll on this, on a 1, nothing's going to happen. It'll create an empty encounter record. I did set this to an encounter. On a 2, it'll roll twice. On a 3, it'll roll 4 times. And on a 4, it'll roll 6 times, producing varying strengths of encounter. So in here, we rolled a couple of times. We've got zombies, 4 zombies. We can try again. We've got a skeleton and another skeleton. And this time nothing happened. Again, nothing happened because we're rolling ones. And this time we've got 4 acolytes and a single mummy. So you can see here you can generate variety of different sizes of encounters. You can also include here, rather than saying a specific number, let's say it's 1d4 times or 1d6 times. And it'll continue to work exactly the same. So here it's constructed something that's quite a bit more difficult with a variety of zombies, skeletons, mummies, and acolytes all together. Now to use it, of course, you would just go ahead and add this to your combat tracker to run the encounter. All right, so that's our random encounter table. Now it's important when you're generating encounters that you're only using NPC records. Item records aren't going to do anything. They won't show up in an encounter. Similar thing when you're generating or outputting a parcel. It's important to make sure that you're only using item entries or just names. You can use, when you generate to a parcel, you can actually just use any old name. So for example, if I did item something, and I don't even need to have an entire item entry created. If I output it, it will create a single item in that outputted parcel. Now that item will have no properties, as you can see. It's completely empty, but I can create an item, usually for junk items. One other thing that I forgot to mention on the parcels is that we can add money to a parcel, a generated parcel. And so to do that, I'm going to type in either a value or a roll. So let's say 3d6 in my square brackets, and then just the denomination of the money, so gold pieces. And when I roll that, you can see it generates a number here. So I can have multiple columns, and then this have an item something and a piece of gold, and it'll generate a single result with the gold generated and some kind of item created in the output result. So a lot of different options there that you can output gold pieces, silver pieces, any of the coin types, as well as items. If you want to link to specific items and not just create blank items, of course, you can always just drag and drop the link to that item, and then when you generate it, it'll include the link and include any information with that item record. All right. The next output type that I want to discuss is outputting to a story entry. Now, this isn't something that I recommend necessarily because there is a different way that we're going to talk about at the end of this video, where we go over story templates, which allow us to use the power of the rollable tables with a much better formatting capabilities. But just for completeness, you can output to a story entry, and there is a limited amount of formatting that is available to us. So if you remember from the formatting video, there are 6 paragraph types that are available in Fantasy Grounds formatted text. And you know, there's your basic text entry, your header text, your bulleted lists, your chat frames, your linkages, and then your formatted tables. From a rollable table, you can only output 4 of those paragraph types. But as I said, we do have a little bit of capability to format the output. So the first up is that we do have the ability to use a small number of HTML tags to control the formatting. So as we can see here on my little notes entry here, if you use the greater less than symbols, these are HTML tags with the H, and then close it with a /H, just like this, then it will create that information as header text. If you use P and /P, it'll create a new paragraph, bold, italic, and underline using the B, I, and U as well. If you want to create the paragraph types of list entries, where each one is its own bulleted list entry, you can do that by creating each entry as its own column. Next up, you can create links to records, maps, whatever, by dropping the links here, and each link has to be in its own column. So when we produce this and we output it to a story entry, this is the output. So if we take a look here, we can see here we've got header created here with the H. We've got a new paragraph that was created here. We've got a secondary new paragraph. This is this secondary new paragraph with some bold text, italic text, and underlined text. This list item and this list item will correspond to these 2 bulleted list items, and then the links will appear down here. Now there's very limited control that we have here of the formatting, so we're going to talk about a better way in just a moment. But before we jump to that, the last thing that I wanted to talk about tables is we've been manually generating tables here, just using the right click and create item, and all of this kind of information we'll have to fill in ourselves. The most tedious part is typically typing in all of the numbers. So there are a little bit, or there's a little shortcut available to you to pre-create tables with some of the numbers already filled in. And that's coming down here to the Edit List button. There is this, it looks like a square grid, and it's the Add Table by Size feature. So if we click Add Table by Size, we have the option of selecting the number of rows that your table is initially going to start with, 2, 4, 6, or more. So we'll say we're going to start with 6 rows. And then it allows you to set the step size. So a step size of 1 means each row on that table will be incremented by 1. So the first row will be 1, the second row will be 2, the third row will be 3, and so forth. Step size 2 is the first row is going to be 1 and 2, 3 to 4, 5 to 6, and so forth. So we can set a few of the common step sizes, and let's say we're going to do step 4. So now you can see we've generated a table with 6 rows, and the numbering has already been done for us. Then if we need to tweak that, we can always say, oh, well, I didn't need that 6th row, or we can tweak the numbers if necessary. But that's a quicker way than having to manually type in all of those numbers. So for example, we could do even as much as 100 rows with a step size 1 to get a true percentile type roll. Now, one other thing is the step sizes do not have to be even. So I can have, for example, 1 to 20 is one value, and the output of 21 to 25 is a separate value. And each of these ranges can be whatever you would like in terms of the number range. All right, so that's talked about tables. Now let's transition over to story templates. Now, story templates are up here on the story record. If we come up here to the story templates and we create a new one, we'll see that it looks exactly the same as a story, except it has a generate button here at the bottom. So just like we saw in the tables, we can use the square bracket notation in order to make some modifications, or in order to do some automation in terms of rolling. So the first up, we can generate numbers. So let's say we can do a 2D 20 in here. And if we hit generate, it'll create a story entry with that number in it. So with that, we could do something as simple as a stat generator. So here's one it's very simple. It just rolls a 3d6 for each stat, or it does a 4d6, and you'll have to manually drop the lowest. So I can click generate, and it'll generate all of the stats that I may want to roll. Well, it's not a character I may want to play, but you know, that's the way the dice rolls. So that's our square brackets. Now, in addition to rolling numbers, we can roll on tables as well. So if I were to type in a table name, attitude, I can go ahead and roll on a table and it'll output that result. This is really handy because I can now produce, you roll on multiple different tables in order to generate more complicated, more interesting results. I can do things like attitude, names, and we'll say profession. And I have all of the formatting capabilities that a story gives me. So let's say this is a bulleted list, this is a link item, and I'm going to use a layout table here and include that name in there, or the name of the profession in there. So now when I generate it, it'll generate this entry for me and has all of the information for me. So you can see here, this is very powerful. I can also use things like bold, italic, underline, and the output will additionally be bold, italic, or underline. So this allows for some very powerful dynamic generation of information. There's one additional capability here. Let's delete this. There's one additional capability here when we are using this automated generation. So when we go ahead and call a table like attitude, that'll give me a result. I can reference a previous call to that table. So if I use the greater than, less than symbols instead of the square brackets, you'll see that it uses the value of the previous roll and doesn't re-roll. So if I hit generate, those two will be the same. Now, why is this important? This is nice because it allows you to generate things and reference previous rolls. So here's an example of slightly more complex, just tiny bit, and you can see here we've got the generation up in the title as well, the name of the entry. We've got names and profession, our table. We've got attitude, gender, race. Now, in this case, I'm referencing the previously rolled value here on race. Color, rolling again, and again, referencing that previously rolled value of race. I'm referencing the previously rolled value of names from up here in the title, again with the names and profession. So now when I generate this, I have a consistent set of chat frames with information that I can output to my players. Before you stands a happy-looking female human with ivory hair. Hi, my name is Sarah, and I'm a candlestick maker. So you can see here, all of it is now consistent because I've been able to roll initially and reference the values of those previous rolls. So that gives us the benefit of both the formatting capabilities of story entries and all of the complex generation capabilities of our tables. Now, when you are creating a table and you want to link to something, link to a table as opposed to an item or other record, when you roll on that subtable, it will not copy a link to it. So, for example, if I did a random treasure generator link here, for example, generate random treasure, which should call this table, it's not going to output the link to the generated treasure parcel and paste it here. So if I were to click on that, you can see here it's taken each sub element and lined it up, which isn't what you want. So when you want to do that kind of thing, you're actually better off just directly linking to that and do any other generation there. And then when you generate the story template, you can just quickly roll on it to produce the outputted treasure parcel in this case, or encounter or whatever. So your story template, you should link to the table just directly and then manually roll that after the story entry is generated. But things like single word or paragraph or phrase kind of things work really well to automatically generate and fill in those kinds of things. Thank you.